Hi everyone, my name is Andrea Lyles with Caldrea Collections. You're probably here because you've purchased my Girls Everyday Undies pattern. Today I'm going to show you not only how to sew it, two different methods actually for finishing the bands, but I'm also going to do an overview of the pattern and how this works. I apologize for any noises you might hear. There is some construction going on outside. Okay, so the pattern, it looks like this, and you'll see that it's made for hip sizes 19 to 30 inches, and it's a little bit different from other underwear patterns you may have bought before. So this one, you can think of it as kind of like an a la carte style where you take 3 measurements and then you choose the waistband, the main body of the underwear, and the leg bands based on those 3 measurements. So I'm going to show you right here on page 3 of the instructions. It shows you how to take those measurements, and I want to point something out. For the waist, it is parallel with the ground, measured at the belly button. The hip is measured, I put around the largest part of the hip, but if you are a little bit more experienced, this measurement should really be around where the leg starts at the hip. And then the leg one is the one I really wanted to point out, because you'll see that it is not a circumference around the thigh that is parallel with the ground. The leg measurement should follow where a leg band normally sits on underwear, and so it's going to kind of follow the curve of how your leg basically attaches to your hips. Okay, so once you have those 3, then you can choose your waistband, your leg bands, and which pattern piece you're going to use. Okay. The pattern pieces themselves, I'm going to show you that first. Most of them fit the main body of the underwear. You'll see that the pattern pieces each fit on their own page, so you don't have to tape anything together for that. And the leg bands and the waistband you will have to tape together. I'll show you the waistbands, for example. And you'll see these little circles, kind of donuts on the ends. And so those match up with the next page. So you'll see I've already cut out, I've taped together and cut out one of the leg bands already. So that's what it should look like when you tape it together. You'll have that complete donut. Okay. All right, and then I would like to point out one thing with the main pattern pieces, that not all of the sizes, but some of them have this option for grading. And so this one, for example, I'll be doing the 26-inch hip today. I can either opt to cut on the solid line for a waist that's larger than 23.5 inches, or if the waist is smaller, if it's 23.5 or smaller, then I'll be cutting on the dashed line. So for the one today, for example, she has a 24-inch waist, and so I'll be cutting on the solid line. Okay, let's talk about fabric. The fabric that I recommend, I'm very big on sustainability, so of course I'm going to recommend organic cotton or other natural fibers. I've also used bamboo for this. But something that is mixed with 5 to 6% spandex, but also a jersey that's not too lightweight. This one is made for like a mid-weight jersey. For example, I have this Mona Luna organic cotton jersey knit. It's a mid-weight jersey, and the instructions file on page 2 has a stretch guide. It looks like that. Okay, you can either print out this paper, or if you have a big enough screen like I'm on my iPad, then you can just use the screen. I'm gonna show you how to use that, so I'll have to turn this camera around. Okay, so there's the stretch guide. And what I'm going to do is measure the percentage of stretch of this fabric. And so I'm going to, on the cross grain, which I'll show you how to make sure you have that correct, I'm going to put one thumb on the edge, the outside edge of that stretch guide. And then with my other thumb and nail, I'm going to kind of hold at the other end of it. And then this one's going to stay put, and I'm just going to stretch with this one. And you'll see that I make it to almost 60%. So that's perfect, because like the instructions say, it should be 40 to 60% the stretch. Okay, let me show you how to tell the grain. On a printed jersey, it'll be very easy to tell the right side and the wrong side, because the right side is printed and the wrong side is not. But for example, if I take out this solid jersey, then it's a little bit harder to tell. But one thing you'll notice that on the edge, that's the selvage, so that one's curling to the wrong side. But on a cut edge, like this one I've been cutting on, if I tug on that, it curls to the right side of the fabric. So the right side of the fabric, you can see it's like columns, like ribs. And so that is the grain line of the knit. It's not a true grain line like a woven, but it still shows you what direction you should cut your pieces in. And then on the back side is the more loop side. Okay, let's get that to focus. Okay, so you can see the little loops, and there, so it's a little bit more horizontal looking. It's not well defined on the length grain. So on the right side, you can see a clear grain line. So I kind of pointed that out in the file here on page 6. It has a close-up of what I'm talking about. Okay, just a few notes on the pattern files. So I'm going to start with the leg bands and waistbands. They're both laid out the same way. These are the only ones that you'll have to tape together. If you look here on one margin of each page, or 2 margins in the case of the waistbands, you'll notice these donuts. And so you cut off the margin of one page and you join it to the other page. See, it says join pieces. But first I'm going to point out, since I just saw this, the 1-inch test square, always test that first to make sure that you have the page printed out at the right size, which you will if you printed it out at 100% scale, or it might say original size. Okay, so I printed mine out, and I joined 2 pages together. I already cut out the leg band that I'm going to use, but you see it's 2 pages there. I cut the margin off of this one, and I overlapped it here so that the donuts made one donut. Okay, so that's the idea with that. And then you just cut out your pattern piece. The other pattern pieces will be on their own pages. If they all fit on one page, they'll be on one page. Otherwise, it'll be 2 pages. But again, 1-inch test square. And then you'll notice that some of the sizes have these dashed lines like this. And the pattern will always indicate when you need to cut on the dashed line and when you need to cut on the solid line. There are occasions when you may need additional fit adjustments. We have noticed that with girls who are exceptionally tall and thin for their age, you may need to lengthen the gusset piece is this one, so you could add Somewhere between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch has worked pretty well to the top of that. And although the hip curve here on the back works in most cases, for some people it has worked out better to kind of eliminate some of that, the depth of that curve, and make it a little straighter. And that's usually when the child is a little less round in the back. If there are any fit issues that you can't figure out, you can feel free to contact me and I will do my best to help you out. So I'm going to be making the size 26 pattern, a 26-inch hip with a 24-inch waist. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut out the pattern pieces that I need for that. All right, so I have these 3 pieces and the leg band and the waistband, and you'll see that I did not cut at 24 and the leg will be 17. I didn't cut there either. And that's because I make a lot of different sizes. And so for me, I'll just bend this back at 24 or fold this back at 24. And I'll cut there, but then if I need a 25 later on, all I have to do is unfold it. Okay, so if you're only making one size, then it doesn't matter. But if you need to make multiple sizes, that might be something that helps. So you don't have to print multiples or cut multiples. All right, let me bring in my fabric for the main panty pieces. I'm going to show you how to cut this out. The pattern is designed to be cut on the fold. So the length grain is this way. And my particular fabric is bi-directional, so it doesn't matter if I cut it this way or if I cut it this way, or in this case it would be this way or this way, because it works in either direction. But if you have a print that only works in one direction, then you'll want to make sure that you place these so that everything's facing the right way. Okay, let's see how wide this is. All right, that would be good. So I'm just gonna fold this along the length grain. And I'm going to place this folded edge, I'm going to place this straight edge that has that fold indicator right on this, right on the edge of the fold of the fabric. I'm going to do the same with this piece. And then usually there's enough room here where you can position the gusset and you'll automatically get 2 pieces. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out, and then I will show you how to lay out the waistband and the leg bands. Okay, I have the other pieces cut, and now I'm ready to cut leg bands and waistband. The grain line is marked here. That means that I'm not going to cut this long ways. I'm going to cut it on so that it goes across, and the length grain is going up and down this way. Okay, so you can either pin this and cut it out with scissors if that's what you have, but I like to cut these, since they're rectangular, with a rotary cutter. So I'll bring in my quilting ruler, and I know that these are 1.75, 1 3/4 inches wide. So double that is 3.5 inches. So I'm going to cut a piece 3.5 inches. And then what I do is I just measure what the length of this is. This one is 12 5/8. So I'm going to do that. And then I just cut that in half. Those are my 2 leg bands. And now I will do the same with the waistband. I brought out my longer ruler for this part. This one is 3 inches wide, and then I just measure the length. 19. Okay, so now I have a waistband, 2 leg bands. I have the front piece, the back piece, and I have 2 gusset pieces. And so now I will show you the sewing machine and the serger and what settings I recommend. Okay, so first I'm going to show you the sewing machine settings. Many of you will know what this is, some of you won't. This is a walking foot. And so this is what many home sewers use if they don't have a serger. And the reason for it is that when you're sewing knits are stretchy, and your machine has feed dogs that pull the fabric in from the bottom. So what that does is that while it's getting pulled through and the presser foot is pressing on it, it's stretching out that fabric. And so then you end up with wavy seams. This walking foot, you'll see when I pull up on this, that black thing that pops out at the bottom. So what that does is that it grabs the fabric from the top too. So essentially it's grabbing the fabric and pulling it along with the bottom feed dogs. And so that prevents it from getting stretched out. Personally, well, I used to use the walking foot a lot before I changed machines, but since I've had this one, I haven't really felt a need to use it. A lot of machines have a presser foot pressure adjustment knob. And so what that allows is for the presser foot not to be pressing down so much on the fabric. So without pressing down on it very hard, then the fabric can kind of slide through without getting stretched out. So I tend to lower mine to a setting of about 3. Mine goes from 1 to 10. Not all machines have that feature, and some of the ones that do, the adjustment knob doesn't really seem to make much of a difference. My last machine, it seemed like it didn't make much of a difference either way. But this one is pretty good about it. So I just lower mine down to 3, sometimes even 2, depending on the fabric. Let me see if I can bring you closer to that. There, you can see the presser foot icon and the adjustment knob. All right, back to the front of the machine. A lot of machines, most machines, have a zigzag stitch, and so that is a good stretch stitch to use for when you're sewing knits. You can use a plain zigzag. When you're sewing some of the seams, you might want something that's a little bit more compact, and so a lot of machines also have this lightning stitch. And so I will be using both of those, and you'll see when I use each one. I do have a serger, and these can be sewn entirely on the serger, but I actually like to use my machine for a lot of it. Okay, so now I'm going to take you over to the serger. Okay, so let's talk about the serger. The serger is excellent for sewing knits. And what I usually have it set at is a stitch length of about 2.5 all the way up to maybe 3. And the differential feed is what really makes a difference with sewing knits. If you have it on N, normal, I guess that's what it means, then it's feeding the fabric through at its normal rate. If you turn that up though to, most machines go to 2, this one goes to 2. I usually set it at around 1.5. So what the differential does is that Like we talked about on the other machine, that the presser foot stretches out the fabric as the feed dogs are pulling through. What this one does is that if you have it set higher, then it's pulling the fabric through faster so that it doesn't have the chance to get stretched out. So those are the settings that I use on my serger. Okay, and we'll get to sewing in just a bit. All right, so I'm going to hope that this view works out. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 2 gusset pieces and attach them to the back. So right down here is where the gusset piece is attached to. So one of them is going to go right sides together. Okay, if you want, you can mark the centers of the gusset pieces and the back beforehand, but the pieces are so short that I find that it's not really necessary. And then the other piece is going to go right side of the gusset to the wrong side of the back. Okay, and then what I normally do is I put a pin right in the middle. And then there's a little bit of an opposing curve, so just kind of line that up. And then I put a pin on each side. All right, so I have 3 pins just like that. You'll see there's a little bit of like a point right there between the gusset and the main piece. That should be at about 1/4 inch. And so this pattern is made for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now I'm just going to stitch that down from that point to this point. And I'm going to use that lightning stitch I was telling you about, because that will allow me to open up this seam afterward. All right, and then if I pull up on the 2 gusset pieces, you'll see that the right sides are facing out. Okay. The burrito method. It may look a little intimidating at first, but it's really not. So I'm going to face this this back piece up. I'm going to tuck this one under, and I'm going to leave this one sticking out. I'm going to roll that back piece up, and then you should be able to see both of your gusset pieces facing up. I'm going to take that front piece and I'm going to put that face down over here, and then I'm going to take that gusset piece that's toward the back and I'm going to bring that over and close that in. Then I have 3 layers right there, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch stitch along that edge. Okay, the reason that I do that on the sewing machine is that I find that it's easier to keep the edges lined up than it is for me to do that on the serger. So now you should have this, a burrito. And so I'm just going to open up the gusset here and pull both of the big pattern pieces through, and it'll unfold, and this is what you'll have: the front piece, the 2 gusset pieces, and the back. Then I'm going to take these right sides together and line up the side seams. Just like that. And I'm going to sew also 1/4 inch stitch on there. Okay, and you'll see that it ended right at that point as well. Some people ask why that point is there. That's because you're going to be folding these toward the back. And so when you do that, those pieces line up with the edge of the back. Okay, so one side seam is done. And now I'm going to take the other side and line up the side seams. Okay, so that's your main panty. It should look like underwear now. If you did the sides with a serger, then you probably feel good about just leaving it as is. Since I did mine on the sewing machine, I'm going to stitch those down toward the back. So I'm going to turn this right side out. Okay, and I'm going to take these side seams and I'm going to pull both of them toward the back. And I'm going to do a zigzag stitch all the way down. I'm using a length of 3.6, a width of 3.6 and a length of 1.8. It's not really like super important which width and length you use, but I would say to go between a width of 3 and 4 and a length between 1.5 and 2, somewhere around there. Okay, my machine's having a little trouble feeding that through, so I'm going to give it a tug. And I'm going to do the same thing I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm pulling these toward the back. Okay, so for right now, I'm done with this. I'm actually going to do another one so that I can show you the two methods of attaching the waistband and the leg bands. Okay, now that we have the main body done, I'm going to take the leg bands, and this is the right side of the fabric. The camera doesn't want to zoom in, but this is the right side. So I'm going to put it right sides together, and I'm going to sew that short side with a 1/4 inch seam as well. All of these steps that I've done, they can be done on the serger. I'm going to keep doing this on my sewing machine because I like to be able to open up the seam for sewing later on. And I'm going to do the same with the waistband. Fold it and do a 1/4 inch seam on that short side. Okay, so that's what the lightning stitch looks like. And like I said, I like that because that allows me to then open this up, and that way when I fold these over, it's not so bulky when I'm sewing that onto the main pieces. Okay, so now that I have my waistband and my leg bands and the main body of the underwear together. I'm going to first do the waistband. So for method 1, I'm going to fold this in half all the way around, about like that. Okay, and a lot of people put the seam at center back. I tend to put mine on one of the side seams. I'm going to turn this inside out. Okay, and I'm going to take that seam, this is the way I do it, and I'm going to pin it to one of the side seams. I'm going to pull all the way over to the other side, and I know that this is going to go on the other side seam. Okay, so now I have the two sides pinned in, but you'll see that there's extra fabric on the front and the back. And so we just want to distribute that evenly. So I'm going to just, this is the way I do it. I put those two pins together and then I just pull this way, and I know that's the center there. And I do the same here. Once I line those up, I pin that together. You'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so now I have a little bit extra on this side, and I have a little bit extra on this side. And I'm going to do the same on the opposite side. So I'm doing quarters, basically. Okay, so now I have 4 pins in, and the fabric's evenly distributed. And for this first method, I am going to do it on the serger. That's how I like to do it. But you can do it on the sewing machine. It's fine. And we're going to do a 1/4 inch all the way around. So I'm going to place that side seam under my presser foot. Let me engage my knife. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that all those layers line up really nice. I gotta raise my needles all the way up. Make sure that fits in there nice and snug. Okay, then I can drop the presser foot, and I like to put the needles in so that I can tug at this. So that extra fabric, I'm going to stretch just the waistband to where this bottom fabric will line up smooth, but not stretch the bottom fabric. I don't want to stretch the bottom one. I just want to make the top to where it lays flat with the bottom. Okay, and I'm gonna do that all the way around. If you're not going to stitch this seam down, then you can cut that long and thread the end through the existing serger stitches, but I am going to be tacking it down, so I'm just gonna cut it right there. So now my waistband is attached. And I'm going to do about the same process for the leg bands as well. So I'm going to turn it inside out again. I'm going to take my band and I'm going to fold it just like I did the waistband. Okay, I'm going to take that seam and I am going to line that up with the side seam. It doesn't matter which side. I actually go just a little bit in front of it so that I'm not lining up all that bulk together. I pin that in place. Then I'm going to take the opposite side and I'm going to line that up right about where that gusset curve is. And like I did before, I'm going to distribute that extra fabric evenly around. I'm just going to do quarter pins. Okay, just like that. And I'm going to do the same on the opposite side. All right, now I've got both sides pinned. And I'm going to take this to the serger. I'm going to sew it just like I did the waistband. I like to start at the side seam. My needles are up. Bring that needle down, hold it. Make sure everything is lined up. And drop my presser foot. Okay, again, I'm going to just stretch the bands to where it lines up with the main body of the underwear, but without stretching that bottom layer. One band is on, and I'm about to do the other one. Okay, so I have the waistband and the leg bands attached. I'm going to turn that right side out so you can see. And you could stop right there and call it good. I'm going to do the other optional step of tacking those seam allowances down. So with the waistband, I could take off this piece, allow my machine to have this free arm. And I'm going to fold those seam allowances away from the waistband. So they're right here. And I'm going to zigzag stitch all the way around. I'm using a length of 2 and a width of 3.6. Okay, that's what it should look like. And on the inside, you see the seams are tacked down towards the bottom. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the leg bands. So I'm going to turn those seam allowances, face them away from the bands and toward the main part of the underwear. And we are all done. If you have skip stitches when you're sewing on your sewing machine, it could be that you need to switch out to jersey needles or stretch needles. This particular machine is not too finicky. It does just fine with a universal needle, but I have had other sewing machines that I have to use a stretch stitch whenever I'm sewing knits. So that completes method number 1. Okay, now I'm going to show you method number 2. So in this case, I'm not going to fold the waistband before I attach it to the underwear, but I will do the same where I turn this inside out, and I'm going to line it up the same way. Notice I do it with the seam open, and I'm doing this right sides together. I'm going to take the opposite side and line it up with the other side seam. And then I'm going to distribute that evenly. I'm putting a pin at center front and center back. Okay. And so now I can take this to the machine. I'm going to also take this to the serger. I could do it on the sewing machine. It really doesn't matter. And I'm going to sew the waistband on. Okay, this seam will be enclosed, so you can go ahead and just cut that right at the base there. So the waistband is partially attached now. And I'm going to do the same with both of the leg bands. So I'm not going to fold them in half. I'm going to turn them right side out so that I can pin these right sides together. I usually start at the side seam. Once I've pinned the side seam, this opposite side, just like last time, it lines up right with that curve in the gusset. Then I'm going to just distribute the rest of that fabric evenly all the way around. And I'm going to sew that on the same way. Clip that at the base. So now my leg band is partially attached as well, and I'm going to do the other one. So at this point, I'm done with the serger. And the point of doing it this way is to be able to enclose that serger seam, and it leaves a nice flat finish. You'll see that at the end. I usually do this next part of sewing by touch, so I forgot to show you beforehand, and I actually don't even have any fabric marking pens right now. You can take a little ruler, this is a seam gauge, and you can make a mark 1/2 inch down from that edge all the way around on the waistband, and then all the way around on the leg bands as well. And then we are going to be folding this over, and if you had that mark, you could fold that edge down to the mark, okay? And then pin, let's pretend there's a mark there, and then you would just pin that in place. Okay, so that's the idea. So I'm going to pin it like that all the way around. Okay, now I've gone ahead and pinned that all the way around. I'm going to turn it right side out. Okay, so what that did was that, you can probably feel it, there is now a 1/4 inch of this fabric sticking below that seam. And so we're going to zigzag stitch that all the way around. Even though I've pinned it, I'm going to always make sure that I feel that fabric there as I'm sewing. And again, I'm using the same stitch length and width, 3.6 width and 2.0 length. And I'm going to make sure that that catches that fabric as I go down along the edge of that seam. Okay, see, I zigzagged all the way around on the main fabric, and on the inside that caught the very bottom of that waistband, and now that serged edge is enclosed and it's a very smooth finish. That's the same process that I'm going to do for the leg bands. Okay, so I've pinned the leg bands the same way that I did the waistband, with that 1/4 inch past that seam. And so I'm going to zigzag all around there too. Make sure you keep feeling for that fabric, especially on these tighter curves. It tends to want to ride away from that, from where it was pinned. Okay, that's done. And the last thing I'm going to show you is, if you don't have a free arm on your machine, or if you're working with a size that's too small to fit the leg around the free arm, what I do in those cases is I turn it inside out, and then I sew like this. Okay, so you see my leg bands are stitched down the same way, where the serge seam, or if you did it in your sewing machine, however, that bulky part of the seam is enclosed, and that makes this a lot thinner. I'm going to turn that right side out, and from the outside it looks exactly the same as the other one. Okay, we are done. So this is what method 1 looks like, where you can see that serged edge, or the seam allowance if you did it on a sewing machine, and it's tack down if you did that option of tacking it down with a zigzag stitch. That's method 1. And with method 2, they look much the same. The only difference is that seam is enclosed and you have a smoother finish. As far as fit, this one might give a little bit more coverage because that seam allowance is not turned under. Than this one. It might feel a little bit narrower in the gusset area. But anyway, congratulations on sewing your pair of underwear. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with me via the contact form on my website, or email me at caldrea.collections@gmail.com. And if you are having any fit issues, you can feel free to also contact me about that, and I'll help you address any fit issues, or if any changes need to be made with particular body types. So thank you very much for purchasing the pattern and for watching the tutorial. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you can follow me on Instagram at Caldrea Collections to keep up with our latest makes and different products that are available. I look forward to seeing you guys again, and I do welcome any feedback that you have. Thank you.